We're delighted to have him here talking to us about law and order. Ladies and gentlemen, Julian Malins.
Well, thank you for that very flattering and somewhat misleading introduction. The reason why we had to have 2 police and crime commissioner elections in Wiltshire was because the Conservative candidate turned out to be a crook. You might say that was to be expected. Now, everybody in this hall has paid good money for their ticket. So I felt that I ought to make an uplifting, entertaining speech so that you would feel that you had value for money. The problem is that the state of our criminal and civil justice systems is neither uplifting nor entertaining. It is absolutely dire. So, I won't go into its problems. I will go into what we will do when we form a government. Our first priority is the huge backlog in criminal cases. This began long before COVID. Why is there a huge backlog? The consequences are appalling. Hundreds of criminal charges get dropped every week because the victims and the witnesses have lost the will to live and they have forgotten much of what they saw 2, sometimes 3 years ago. So what are we going to do about that? Well, we will appoint a whole new raft of stipendiary magistrates. Those of you of my advanced age will remember that that's what they used to be called, until Tony Blair came along and decided he could get away with reducing their salary by calling them with a grander name. District judges crime, but they're stipendiary magistrates. We will appoint many more, and we will give them much greater powers, because with greater powers, they can stop the tidal wave of absurd cases which find their way into the Crown Court. When I sat for over 20 years as a part-time judge at the Inner London Crown Court, I would say 2 out of 3 cases that came up in front of me, in front of a jury, should not have been there at all. And we will put a stop to that. Now, I'm going to say something that will be dear to the heart of my own profession, but I hope will also have wider approval. We will reform the criminal legal aid system. The current system is that everybody, from billionaire to pauper, gets criminal legal aid. And the barrister or solicitor is paid directly by the state. A pittance, I might say. Time without number, Drug dealers have been up in front of me, 4 or 5 mobile phones, 6 or 7 bank accounts, arrested with £2,000 in their pocket, and they get legal aid. It's a myth that there's a huge number out there of criminals or those accused who've got no money. That's an absolute myth. It's very rare. Crime is a business, and it's undertaken by people to make a profit. They will, in future, have to pay their barrister directly, and in those very few cases where the accused simply has no money, then we'll adopt that one part of the criminal justice system in America which works, which is the public defender system. Now, the next reform we're going to undertake is to take away motoring cases from the lay justices and have specialist motoring courts. One of my aunts by marriage, formidable justice of the peace, constantly dealt with motoring cases about which she knew absolutely nothing because she had no driving license and had never driven a car in her life. So we're going to have specialist motoring cases, and the existing JPs can deal with the local and minor crime. Now, it may shock you to know that there are currently in prison under this government and previous governments several thousand people who are illegally there. The Conservative government, Michael Howard was responsible as Home Secretary, introduced a sentencing regime called imprisonment for public protection. Why is it illegal? It's illegal because there is no end date. And at Nuremberg, it was decided that one of the many grounds upon which the concentration camps were illegal was that people went in without knowing whether they were going to be there for a week, a month, a year, 10 years. Even the Soviets, when they sent people to the gulags in Siberia, gave you 2, 5, or 10 years. 10 years, of course, being a death sentence. But it was definite. These people are in prison illegally. Now, the government knows this perfectly well and is pussyfooting around trying to deal with it surreptitiously. But the solution, which, if it still exists, this problem when we form the government, will be to give them all fixed sentences. Now, I'll tell you something that's shocking. In all the 50 years that I've been a barrister, the vast majority of Lord Chief Justices who head our criminal justice system have not been criminal practitioners. They've been commercial practitioners and mates of the relevant people. That will cease under a reform UK government. The LCJ the LCJ will come from criminally experienced legal practitioners. And finally, on the criminal side, the Crown Prosecution Service. If I had longer, I would tell you how that came into existence. But the then Attorney General, Patrick Mayhew, who was about the last proper Attorney General, assured me that he hadn't been consulted by Mrs. Thatcher when she brought it in. Now, we can't get rid of the CPS like that. What we can do is to give the police the power to instruct local solicitors and local barristers in criminal cases if they want to. And we will subject the CPS to what we approve of, which is competition. Now, I'll turn to civil. When I was a young lawyer, there was a standard question for lawyers: would you rather live in a society with no doctors or society with no lawyers? And we all have to think about that. Since I know you would think not a moment to come up with the answer. You'd rather live in a society without any lawyers. But the truth is that a functioning civil justice system is absolutely the cornerstone of a civilized society, and we don't have one. And the reason... And the reason why we don't have one, because 50 years ago when I became a barrister we did, was because in the 1990s, a group of civil servants got together and decided to draft a rule book whereby going from your problem, your complaint, to talking about it to the judge was impossible. At every stage in the process, the complexity of it and the cost of it would mean that there would be far fewer trials. And there are far fewer trials. When I was young, if you went into the Supreme Court, barristers, solicitors everywhere, courts running full tilt, same in the county court. Now, they let the Royal Courts of Justice out for filming and for playing badminton, because there are no trials going on, because nobody can afford or can manage to get through the complex rules. We will alter all that, revert to the rules which worked perfectly well for centuries before the year 2000, and we will abolish the cost system. It's one part of the American system which we can admire. It's already the case in family work and employment work, but ordinary civil complaints, you can't risk it in case you have costs awarded against you. So we'll alter that regime so that that risk is abated. You'll only have costs against you if the judge thinks you've behaved wholly unreasonably. And finally, I mean, how difficult is it to be a judge? You listen to the plaintiff, you listen to his witnesses, you listen to the defendant, you listen to his witnesses, you have a look at the documents, if there are any relevant documents in the case, and then you come to a fair result. That's the job of the judge. It's good fun. And it's not a problem. I remember years ago, in front of a wonderful judge, I was trying to persuade him with a whole series of good legal cases by way of authority to come to what was obviously an unjust result. And the judge eventually said to me, Mr. Malins, if I think the law is going to lead to an unjust or unfair result, that's because I don't know the law well enough. Very true. So we'll get cases now, you will get your cases under our government in front of a judge whom you're all paying to do that job. I must close. Something dear to my heart. And I think this is true of all professions, not just my own. We, as Reform UK government, will restore self-governance to the professions. What that means in the case of lawyers is that we will abolish the Legal Services Board, the Solicitors Regulatory Authority, and the Bar Standards Board, and we will return governance of the profession to the bar and to solicitors. Because what are these bodies, which are nothing more than an English Inquisition, what have they actually achieved apart from making life a misery for all professionals? I'll tell you what they've achieved. There are thousands of young men and women out there, all, and I see some of them, all in huge debt, who've passed all their exams with flying colours, but then they can't be a solicitor or they can't be a barrister because they can't get an apprenticeship. which we call a pupillage and solicitors call a training contract. And why can't they do that? The answer is because the Solicitors Regulatory Authority and the Bar Standards Board have made it impossible for barristers and expensive for barristers and solicitors to take trainees and pupils. It is not merely wrong, it is wicked. And a Reform UK government will solve that problem at a stroke. We will qualify everybody who is otherwise qualified by Act of Parliament. And that's very easily done. I mean, the one real grouse, and I'll finish, that first alerted me to the monstrous nature of Her Majesty's government was when I was deprived of my 21st birthday party. At 18, I was not an adult. It was another teenage birthday party. But then, under the Family Law Reform Act 1969, on the 1st of January 1970, I became an adult. So when I then got to 21, my parents said to me, "Oh, you've already had your adulthood party. You can't have a 21st. What's the point? You're already an adult." So I thought to myself, you can't trust governments. That's absolutely true. On another occasion, I'll tell you why Dennis Healey ruined my life. Anyway, these are the outline of what we're going to do when we are in government. Thank you very much.